Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you're watching on, and they should appear here in my chat room. And the chat room is on the screen today because we do not have a guest. And our subject for today is titled This and That, which means it's going to ramble a little bit. And if you have anything you would like to discuss, please put it in the chat room and we can talk about that. Um, our first program this week was celebrating the 2-year anniversary of this program. Um, and our second was about the auction we currently have going at Gaia Thrift. In the hope of raising money to pay down the utilities that built up over the winter. And I want to say hello to Janet Gann, Renee Bauta, and Swack Fan in the chat room. It's good to see all of you. And so far this week, and hello to Mary Hawk, we've dealt with the past and the future. And hello to Nikki Dodd in the chat room. And today we're going to talk about a number of things. I did ask people what they would like to see in the future on the program. One of the things that people said was more interviews. And I have done interviews during these 2 years, but not as much as I had expected. And yeah, I'm going to see if I can't do some more interviews. And I thought maybe today I might talk a little bit about some of the interviews I've done over the years and what made them interesting. And some of the people we've done the most interviews with at Corellian TV include Selena Fox, Oberon Zell, Olivia Robertson. I think those are the largest groups of interviews for individual people. And each one of them, of course, is fascinating. Lady Olivia is now in spirit, so I would say there'll be no further interviews with her, except we may have some unpublished footage of her that may come out in the future. Because I attended an awful lot of Fellowship of Isis conventions and did a lot of filming. And although I'm sure there's not another interview, we may have more Lady Olivia somewhere in our past videos. For many years, as we were doing Corellian TV, we were using either tapes or discs to record the videos that we were doing. And we've still got all of those, including certain things that never made it on. Another person, we did a lot of interviews with Raven Gramasi. We did several interviews with Raymond Buckland. And Buckland is someone that we do have some significant unpublished footage of. We were there when Buckland got back the contents of his museum and unpacked them and told stories about them on video that we still have but have never gotten online. So that will be coming one day. It is there in that vast number of discs. We just have to dig it out. We have a very large morgue of old work. We have bags of tapes from the radio days that include interviews that never got up online because they predate the internet as a common thing, including with some of these prominent people that I've already named. Interviews we have with Lady Olivia that are not online. We're talking about ones we did for the radio. There are a number of them. Also, Dina Buddha, the Icean Archpriestess for Chicago. And we have some unpublished interviews with her from the radio programs we used to do. But yeah, we have interviewed so many different people over the years. It's been really was quite an adventure. And this is 2 years for Midday with Reverend Don, but some of our previous programs, Reverend Don's vlog went for 10 years. Living the Wiccan Life, I want to say it went about 10 years. Living the Wiccan Life was interesting. It started out originally as a talk show hosted by Lady Crystal, and it ran 6 episodes in that format. And then we turned it into a slice of life program. And hello to Wendy in the chat room. It's good to see you, Wendy. And first it was talking about our life in Hoopston, where the Witch School headquarters were at the time. And there's some very interesting videos from the early Living the Wiccan Life program talking about that era in our history. Shows the old headquarters, for example. Actually, yeah, I mean, it showed a number of different things. And then almost immediately, we also started covering the different events we were going out to. And so the first celebrity interview, if you want to call it that we did on Magic TV, now Corellian TV, was Raven Gramazzi at the St. Louis Pagan Picnic. And also a number of other things from that event from 2005, I think. Might have been 2006. It was a long time ago. And you can find all of that still in our archives at Corellian TV. And we went on to go to all kinds of different events where we interviewed people of interest. We went to St. Louis Pagan Picnic again and again for about 20 years. We went to INATS, the International New Age Trade Show. We went to the Fellowship of Isis conventions in Chicago. We went to, and hello to Kai Aiden in the chat room. It's good to see you, Lady Kai. I believe Lady Kai is getting ready for illustration in Antarctica and is making memorial snowshoes, which should be quite memorable. And if you don't know what that's about, that's from the April 1st edition of the Corellian Times, and April 1st in general. But yeah, we went to so many different things, and we also went to a number of one-off events. One of the most interesting ones was the Capitol blessing on the occasion of the Barack Obama inauguration, when the pagan community of Washington, D.C. did a blessing and cleansing ritual for that occasion, which was quite memorable. And we have it. We have film of it and interviews with the organizers in our morgue. We have one of the more interesting things we have is the Chicago Pagan Unity Night, where all the different groups of Chicago, as well as some guests, including Oberon Zell, came together for a show of solidarity. Beautiful ritual, very, very long ritual. But with all of those different groups, many of which, because this was certainly more than 10 years ago, many of those groups no longer exist. Many of those people are now in spirit. So quite a little piece of history. And hello to Moondancer in the chat room. It's good to see you, Moondancer. And these are things that I certainly fondly remember doing. I'm very happy that we preserve them in our archives so that people can share them even 10 and 20 years after the fact. We do, as I say, have some material that goes back significantly farther than that, which hopefully we'll one day have online. And as long as they remain online or otherwise accessible, they will always be accessible to people. and these pieces of our history will be preserved. And one of the big things that I often talk about that we really see in our community is the historical disconnect that often seems to happen from one generation to the next. And having this kind of record can hopefully preserve the memory and the knowledge of what happened. Because it seems like every different metaphysical generation somehow comes to think they've started everything and there was nothing before them. And they're continually forgetting their history. And that's where you end up with ridiculous ideas like this all started in the 1960s. As if there hadn't been significant metaphysical revivals in the 1940s and the 1920s and the 1870s, and throughout history, in the 18th century, in the 17th century, you find significant pagan revivals, and some of those groups are still there, notably the Druidic groups, some of which go back to that period in time. Some of the ceremonial groups go back a long way. And there are also smaller, more familial groups that really do go back a good bit of history that the common history that everybody wants to repeat claim cannot exist. But the problem is that common history keeps forgetting or erasing everything that came before. And Moondancer says bards and druids. Well, yes, bards and druids. And ovates, oh my. Now, one of the things that you notice about those older druidic organizations is that theologically they tend to be universalist. And certain historic reconstructionists want to say, well, that's not how the druids were. But actually, I don't know that we have any evidence to suggest that at all. The idea that the Druids were Universalists does not seem at all odd to me, or that they may have become Universalist over time. But then I'm speaking as a Corellian, which is basically a Universalist. And, people talk about the Romans having extinguished the Druids, but that's not entirely true. And Moondancer says, yay, I love this argument. Well, it's an interesting argument, but the Romans did not completely suppress the Druids, and certainly did not completely suppress their religion. In fact, they, until the Christian era, they didn't suppress their religion at all. They suppressed the Druids as an order, but only in the areas they controlled. In Ireland, for example, and parts of Scotland, the Druids continued right along. Now, their position changed. And if you are a student of Celtic history, you will know that after the conquest of Britain by the Romans, the position of Druids in those parts of the Celtic world that were not conquered by the Romans fell significantly. And the bards replaced them as the leading priestly order. But the Druids were still there. And those 16th and 17th century Druidic revivals claim to come from the descendants of those people, but followed a universalist point of view. And I'm not entirely sure I find that to be a particularly difficult point to accept, considering where they came from, because they came from those areas. And one of the reasons, when Christianity did become prominent in Ireland, it was a very different kind of Christianity than what you see in other parts of, well, what you see in the Roman Empire. It was a more accepting and nature-based form of Christianity. And while I don't doubt that surviving Druidic families had to make certain accommodations, I don't know that they would necessarily have ceased to exist. Many of them became families of Celtic Christian priests. And in Irish Christianity, Celtic Christianity, Jesus was described as the archdruid. Um, so when a few centuries later, people say they're descended from those lineages of druids, um, I'm not entirely sure that there's any evidence that they would have ceased to exist in that period, though some of their points of view may have changed. But this is an important thing. Another important thing. One of the things that I remember being taught frequently back in the 70s and the early 80s is the idea that Wicca is descended from the Druids. Um, and I completely find that a credible point of view if the Druids we're talking about are the Druids of Iolo Morganwg or the other Druid revivals of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. They're historically unimpeachably there, and their ideas and teachings certainly do flow into later movements. Alchemy. If you study Wicca and you study alchemy and you don't see the similarity, you're willfully blinding yourself. And Hermeticism as well. These three things are very heavily connected, and alchemy comes straight out of Hellenistic Egypt. So Moondancer says, am I saying that the Gardnerian point of view is correct, that Wicca comes from Druidism? I think what I will say to that is that I believe that that is one of the origins of Wicca. I think that alchemy and Hermeticism are also very important to the origins of Wicca. And I believe that Wicca as a movement basically takes shape in the 19th century and is codified in the 20th. And there are people who want to say it was founded in the early 20th century in just one line, but that's not what you see if you look at the Wiccan community. You see lots and lots of different lines right from the moment they come into public notice. And while those lines sometimes overlap, they involve a lot of different places of origin. And one of the ones Moondancer says, thank you for saying that and being clear about it. Well, I try to be clear about it. I really should probably write about it one of these days. I firmly believe that Gardner totally told the truth about his own experiences. And I think that the writings of, I believe it's Hazelton, on the subject of Dorothy Clutterbuck are all the proof anyone could really ask for, and are as much of a smoking gun as it's possible to have, despite the fact that lots of people totally dismiss it. But, Gardner was very clear that he learned what he understood as Wicca from Dorothy Clutterbuck, who's pretty clearly substantiated as a pagan figure at this point, to anyone who's actually willing to accept the evidence through her own writings in her so-called diaries. The same ones that Ronald Hutton tried to say proved she was not pagan, but that's because he only looked at a very few pieces of them. But now that more of them have been published, and also more about her life, it's very hard to dismiss it. I'm talking about Dorothy. Moondancer says, are we talking about him witnessing the Druids' drum ceremony or Dorothy? I'm talking about Dorothy, but there are plenty of Druids active in Gardner's time. One of the things that is very, very interesting, every now and then you see this expose of the British royal family's involvement in Druidry, and Queen Elizabeth's installment as a Druid. And it amazes me that you ever see this, because I would have thought everybody knew it. And yes, not only is Queen Elizabeth and her late mother, the Queen Mother Elizabeth, involved in Druidism, but The royal family has been involved with Druidism for quite some time, but the Druid order that they're involved in is basically a cultural order devoted to poetry and the preservation of particularly Welsh culture. And there's never been any kind of secret about it, but it's yet another kind of Druidry going back hundreds of years, um, and not considered the least bit controversial, as far as I know, in the United Kingdom. Um, we know also, for example, that the magical fight against Hitler that is talked about in some early writings did actually take place, was actually Dion Fortune who led that movement, though many other people were involved in it at different levels. Um, I don't think there's any question about it at this point, but there were people for years saying this could never have happened. There are a lot of people who want to erase our history. And the sad thing is, a lot of them are part of our community because it makes their position more powerful. It puts them in a position where they can say, well, I founded everything. Well, no living person founded everything in this movement. It's not possible. Um, and it is, I think, important for us to realize just how far back the elements of our movement really go. And, excuse me, it's really puts us in a very different place when we acknowledge that we're part of um, a movement that is hundreds of years old, not a couple of decades, um, despite the fact of having had many changes and many evolutions during that time. But what movement hasn't? If you look at, well, let's look at Christianity or Judaism or Islam, and you'll find that many of the leading movements in all three of those religions um, are very much part of the last 2 centuries, if not purely the 20th century. But they never count themselves as being separate from what came before. For some reason, our community tends to like to do that. I would say that we're a very, very old movement that's had many reformations like every other movement. And we need to acknowledge that, yes, we're still the same people that we have always been, with a few new ideas, just like everybody else. If you look at the people pushing Project 2025, the churches that they belong to um, certainly would not have been were not in existence and would not have been recognizable to most Christians of the 18th century. Um, some of them go back as far as the 19th century, most are 20th century. And a lot of their ideas are very much of that period. But when this happens in those major religions, they don't say, oh, we're totally separate from everything that came before. They say, this is a new interpretation. And I think that within the pagan world, we really need to adopt that same point of view, because it is the reality. And it speaks to us being in a different position from what some of us would like to portray and how the wider society would like to see us. We're certainly not a phase. We've been here for generations and generations. And you don't have to go any farther. If you are foolish enough to think this all started in the 1960s, go back and watch the films of the 1930s that deal with metaphysics, and tell me you don't see our community there. Read the diaries of Dorothy Clutterbuck and tell me that you could not have read that in a contemporary pagan publication and not have known the difference. And if you think you would have known the difference, I really don't think you're telling the truth. They're very much what you would expect from an eclectic pagan of the current era. Now, if you want to say that what she was practicing was different from what Gardner passed on to his descendants, well, yes, I would agree with that. And he said that. Um, he described her practices as being fragmentary, but I would say that that was the assessment of someone who was used to the structure of ceremonialism, looking at a much looser organization, and that her practices were far more cohesive with modern eclectic paganism, and that it's not fragmentary, it is more open in its point of view and doesn't require everything to be scripted. Um, and Moondancer is totally agreeing with this argument. Thank you, Moondancer. Um, but these are things that I think about, and one of the things I started this program talking about interviews, and our interviews with Buckland were very interesting because one of the things that Buckland came out with in one of those interviews was the fact that Gerald Gardner hated the word Wicca and did not want his people to call themselves Wiccan. Um, he was very displeased with that. Wicca with two C's. He did use the word Wicca with one C, and these two things are very different movements. Um, but he did not like the use of Wicca with two C's or the word Wiccan. And as Buckland put it, that was an argument that old Gerald lost. But perhaps he should not have, because a lot of those witch wars of the 80s and 90s and early 2000s revolved around this. Now, Kayleen says, reading of Dion Fortune's work in World War II was very influential on me. And absolutely. It at this particular point in time, it should be influential on us all. And Dion Fortune was quite a remarkable individual. And while I'm not necessarily in agreement with everything that she wrote about or did, that would be true for any person. But I think that she did wonderful work. Um, and, I think that it's very important that we always remember, because I think she could be a little bit of a prude, which was typical for her time, and therefore had a negative attitude toward certain individuals, such as Crowley, that was not necessarily productive. But there's never going to be anyone who we cannot disagree with on some subject. We need to remember the good that people have done and the good examples that they've set, even if occasionally we have disagreements. And I think that, one, that makes for a happier life, and it makes it easier to look to history for guidance. I'm a great believer in the teachings of Confucius, for example. But when I say that, I'm talking about Confucius' teachings about right relationships and duty in general, but not his particular attitudes, particularly toward women and certain aspects of social organization, which I see as being part of the culture of his time, that I do not regard as beneficial. But that doesn't mean that I disregard the good things that he wrote about. And I would say the same thing for Jesus, who had some very good teachings, um, despite being set in what I would consider a rather bad framework. Um, and I think, well, and I would say the same for Aristotle. Aristotle and Plato and that entire group of classical philosophers had some wonderful things to say, but many aspects of the culture that they lived in, and consequently some of the things they taught, are not so desirable. And I think we have to be able to separate these things and extract the good, or we're going to find ourselves um, repeating the past, rebuilding the wheel, for example. Um, but these are part of my this and that revelry today. So now I see that we've come to half past the hour, and we need to take a moment for a word from our sponsors. Why? Because we love our sponsors, and hello, this is Rev Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and I would like to invite you to my Don art showing and auction on Friday, May 9th, with original pieces and prints of my artwork and other interesting items, with the auction at 5 p.m. on Whatnot. And please stay tuned for more announcements and examples of art that will be coming. Thank you. And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub, the Don Art Auction on May 9th, and Corellian Publishing, and the Court of the Five Tribes. And thank you for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion, and let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother God, Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to remain mindful of where we have come from and where we are going to, but always, first and foremost, where we are. Help us to make the most of this now moment, and to use our past to build our future, and to make the beautiful world we want to see. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love, knowing we're always together in our hearts. We thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence, and I will see you again tomorrow.